it rolling, Bob?
Is it rolling, Bob?
Is it rolling, Bob?
Hi, I'm Chris Gregory, and this is a little introduction to my latest book, Minstrel Boy. Here it is. Minstrel Boy, the Metamorphoses of Bob Dylan. And this is the second part of a trilogy of books on Bob Dylan, and it's going to be called Picasso of Song, which is actually a quote from Leonard Cohen about Bob Dylan, and very appropriate, I think. I'm going to be looking at the period from 1967, just after Bob fell off his motorbike and made the basement tapes with the band, all the way through the 1970s, when he went on his rural retreat and was getting away from the limelight, bringing up his kids in the countryside. And then talking about the revival, his first big comeback, I suppose you could say, in the 1970s, when he made the albums Planet Waves and the magnificent Blood on the Tracks, Desire and Street Legal, which is a trilogy of albums that have often been held up in comparison to the famous mid-60s albums. The book also traces what happens when Dylan is converted to Christianity at the end of the 70s and looks at his Christian albums. And in the 80s, I'm also looking at what happened after that, when Dylan really did struggle to write songs that were on a level to what he'd been doing before. So the book's divided into three parts, and the first part is called Retreat, which is about the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s. The second part is called Return, which is about the mid 70s, and finally Rebirth, which is about the conversion and its aftermath in the 80s. And you might call these Bob Dylan's years of struggle, in which he went through a whole series of different personas, if you like, having been incredibly famous since he was 21 years old, and then having been through all the controversy of people shouting at him because he was playing an electric guitar and so on. Then he did retreat into the countryside in order to gain some peace, I suppose. And during that time, he produced some very, very different, much kind of simpler music, if you like, which reflected his personal kind of happiness at the time. In the 1970s, his marriage broke up. He was back out on the road. He was doing all these big tours. And in the 1980s, of course, there was this confrontation with the fans over religion. So this is a period in which Dylan goes through a lot of different changes, not only changes of what he's writing about, but musical changes, a lot of different bands he plays with. And really this is a very personal part of Bob Dylan's story, in which his personal circumstances very much do feed into the songs. Having said that, I'm very wary of writing about saying this song is about this and this song is about that and this song is about this person and that person. It's been done a million times. The purpose of the Picasso of Song trilogy is to produce a very detailed analysis of Bob Dylan's work as a songwriter, or a singing poet, perhaps you might say, in what I call song poetry, which in a way is a redefinition of poetry itself and what we think of as poetry. Bob Dylan fans, and they're really keen Bob Dylan fans, who obviously I'm one and I know a lot of them, these are people that can quote almost Bob Dylan's entire works at you, which is quite a remarkable thing, because Bob Dylan's works are, of course, poetry, as was recognised by his award of the Nobel Prize in 2016 for literature, not for music, but for literature. And in looking at the songs, as well as analysing their meanings or their different possible meanings, I've also hopefully allowed space for plenty of different interpretations, because really there's far too many Bob Dylan writers out there, millions of them on the internet, who are trying to tie down the songs to one particular meaning. The great thing about Bob Dylan's work, and the great thing about the way he's really elevated song poetry into a great art form, is the fact that his work is so ambiguous. And that's particularly important in song poetry, because obviously the songs, particularly the best songs, the most popular songs, are going to be played over and over again. All Along the Watchtower has been played over 1,000 times, Like a Rolling Stone, pretty close to that as well. So another thing I'm looking at in the book is the way in which Dylan has used the idea of song poetry on a live stage to actually show very different versions of the songs. So this is not really what I'd call an academic set of books, although it can certainly be used in study courses. Hopefully I've tried very hard to write it in a very accessible style with a fair dash of humour here and there, which is very important because Bob Dylan songs are actually full of humour. Some Bob Dylan songs, the po-faced kind of analysts have looked at them and tried to find these deeper meanings, actually ignoring the fact that Bob is actually taking the mickey, isn't he, as we say in England. So the Picasso of Song Trilogy is an attempt to produce kind of definitive study of Dylan's work. Each of the volumes are pretty big, as we see. That's a big book, isn't it? There. This is Determined to Stand, which is the first volume, and that's not quite so big, but that's because the print isn't quite so big. But they all are around 200,000 words, so the whole thing will be about 600,000 words altogether. And Determined to Stand, here it is again, that's the third book in the trilogy. I actually wrote that book first, and because I really thought there was a strong need for a book about Dylan's recent stuff. That covers the years from 1990 through to more or less present day. The Minstrel Boy is the second volume, which is going backwards in time, and hopefully Bob would approve of this because he never does anything in a conventional way. The third volume, as yet untitled, should be coming out in the next year or two, and that will, as you may imagine, be looking at Dylan's work in the early 60s up to 1966, when someone shouted Judas at him and he fell off his motorbike. So the point about these books, in lots of ways, is not to produce a dry academic kind of look at Bob Dylan's work, but this is the kind of book that you can read a bit of, listen to the music, read a bit more, listen to a bit more of the music. My aim is to deepen people's appreciation of Bob Dylan's work, and I certainly regard Bob Dylan as one of the major artists of the last millennium, really. And also, I feel that Bob Dylan has redefined poetry in the modern age. He's brought it back to the people, because like 20th century modern poetry, nobody reads it, and it's just basically been taken over by the academics. But Bob has freed up the word. So, okay, hope you enjoy. Bye-bye.
Is it rolling, Bob?
Is it rolling, Bob?
Is it rolling, Bob? Is it rolling, Bob?